Now sit down and listen carefully, because the next minute may change your understanding of what is happening. A Russian tanker is burning in Rostov, but this is only the tip of the iceberg. On the same night, a strike on the Belbek airfield. Millions of dollars worth of Russian military equipment destroyed. And now pay attention. During Putin's direct line, Russians for the first time are loudly asking not why the war began, but when, damn it, it will finally end. On the border with NATO, a provocation. Russian border guards cross into Estonian territory. An accident? Or a test run before a real invasion? And then there is Turkey. Turkey suddenly wants to return air defense missile systems to Russia, all for the sake of approval from Washington. What kind of game has begun in the East? Meanwhile, Zakharova has once again managed to become a meme, this time because of the so-called Europe plunged into darkness. And at the same time, in Russia itself, people are still living in villages without electricity and gas. This is the real picture. And now let us go step by step. On the night of the 18th of December, the sky over Rostov was black not only from winter clouds, but also from smoke. A Russian tanker was on fire. A vessel that had not merely moored at the pier, but was literally pierced by a strike. Local authorities initially spoke of a fire, then of casualties. Soon it became clear this was not an accident. This was not a fuel leak. It was an attack. The governor of the Rostov region confirmed. 2 sailors are dead, 3 more wounded. The vessel bore the name Valery Gorchakov, a name that is now associated with the so-called Shadow Fleet of Russia. Ships like this one have repeatedly been spotted in the ports of temporarily occupied Mariupol and Berdyansk. It is no surprise that it ended up on the list of targets, and yet one thing matters. Even amid fire and smoke, according to the authorities, a spill of petroleum products was prevented, at least for now. But what signal sounded louder that night than the sirens? What exactly was the reason for the strike? The answer did not take long to arrive. Everything happened just a few hours after an attack on the Russian oil depot Nikolaevskaya, which was hit by strike drones of the Special Operations Forces of Ukraine, there as well in the Rostov region. And another tanker, Kapitan Gibert, was damaged. These are no longer isolated incidents. This is a chain, logical, consistent, and extremely painful. And it seems that someone has begun to seriously strike at the most vulnerable point, the logistics of war. But the true climax of that night was not in Rostov, it was in Crimea. At the Belbek airfield, which has long become a key stronghold of Russian aviation, hell broke loose. Long-range unmanned aerial vehicles of the Alpha Special Operations Center of the Security Service of Ukraine attacked several targets at once. And this was not just a raid, it was a surgical destruction of key elements of Russia's air defense system. 2 long-range early warning radar complexes Nebo SVU were hit. Each of them is worth between $60 and $100 million. A radar station 92N, which is part of the S-400 Triumph system, was destroyed. In addition, a Pantsir S-2 surface-to-air missile system was hit. And finally, a strike was delivered against the very heart of the aviation wing, a MiG-31 aircraft with a full combat load. Yes, the very one capable of carrying Kinzhal missiles. The total damage amounts to hundreds of millions. And what is especially important, this is not just equipment. This is defense. These are the eyes and the shield of the Russian army in the south. When such a system collapses, it means only one thing. Partnership meetings in Sochi and statements about triumph come to an end. A struggle for survival begins. And in this struggle, Ukraine demonstrates that it knows how to strike truly painfully. Not with words, but with action. But how is all of this perceived inside Russia itself? With calm? With confidence? No. The mood there is changing, and very quickly. Against the backdrop of new strikes and losses, citizens for the first time in a long while are asking a question dangerous for the authorities. Not will we win, but when will all of this finally end? According to data from a Levada Center survey, ending the war with Ukraine has become the main question that Russians want to ask Vladimir Putin during the upcoming direct line. 21% of respondents are most concerned not with the cause of the war, not with the fate of Ukraine, but with the date of its end. Because the war is beginning to enter homes, in the form of death notices, shortages, fear, and uncertainty. But, and this is where the most alarming part lies, the majority still support Putin, not because they believe, but because they are afraid. Someone says, "I am proud of my son. He has been fighting voluntarily for the 4th year already. I am satisfied with Putin." Someone compares it to the Great Patriotic War, and no one, not a single respondent, says that Russia started the war. The blame, as always, lies with them. That is the paradox. People are tired. People want an end. but they are still not ready to acknowledge where it begins, with the first step of a Russian soldier onto Ukrainian land. And while Russians are searching for the end of the war, Moscow appears to be searching for new beginnings, but no longer in Ukraine, in Estonia. On Wednesday, 3 Russian border guards crossed the border of a country that is a member of NATO for approximately 20 minutes. At first glance, an accident. But under current conditions, there are no such accidents. The incident was recorded on video, the border was immediately reinforced, and Tallinn summoned a Russian diplomat for explanations. The Minister of the Interior of Estonia said directly that it is too early to judge whether this was a provocation or a mistake. But trust has already been cracked. And in NATO, they recall the warning of Secretary General Mark Rutte. Just last week, he said that Russia may attempt to attack one of the alliance's countries as part of its shadow campaign. And here a question arises. What if those 20 minutes were a test of the ground? What if this was not an accident, but a signal? While cameras capture border guards, someone off-screen is studying the reaction. How much time will it take for a diplomatic protest? How much for the transfer of troops? How much for discussion within NATO? The answers to these questions may already be under analysis in the Kremlin. This is no longer a local conflict. It is a spreading stain of instability that is moving ever closer to Europe's borders. And there are fewer and fewer people who still believe that this is simply a war far away from us. But it seems that not only the Kremlin is beginning to change its tone. In the East, something is happening that until recently seemed impossible. Turkey, one of the few North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries that purchased Russian S-400 surface-to-air missile systems, now wants to return them. Yes, you heard that correctly. According to information from the Bloomberg agency, President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan discussed this personally with Vladimir Putin. Turkey, in essence, wants to reverse the deal. Why? The answer is simple: normalization of relations with the United States of America. For the sake of American F-35 fighter jets, for the lifting of sanctions on the defense industry, for a return to the club. Ankara is even considering an option to deduct the sum of $1 billion spent on the S-400 from payments for imports of Russian oil and gas. In other words, take them back, just let us rejoin the F-35 program. In Moscow, as usual, they pretend that nothing is happening. The State Duma openly mocks the idea. Return the S-400? This is not a supermarket. Returns are not предусмотрены. But here is what matters. If Turkey truly takes such a step, it will be a blow not only to a contract, it will be a demonstration. Even Russia's closest partners are ready to turn away if the scent of benefit appears. And then the question arises, how many more such allies are there who smile at summits but are already looking in another direction if it promises greater dividends? Against this background, Russian propaganda continues to do what it does best, telling stories about how everything is bad for others. And once again on stage is Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, decided to declare that Europe has allegedly plunged into darkness. Supposedly, Christmas illumination has been turned off because there are not enough funds to pay for electricity. The message is simple: look at how far the European Union has fallen. But here's the problem. While Zakharova speaks of darkness in Europe, in Russian villages where there is still no gas and no electricity, a 4th winter in a row is already passing. Places where heating means firewood and a light bulb is a luxury. Russian-speaking residents of Europe responded instantly. Photos, videos, ironic comments. Here is your darkness. The lights of Berlin, the markets of Paris, the shining center of Prague. Yes, there is saving and restraint, but no one is turning off Christmas. In reality, it is not Europe that is in darkness. It is Russia trying to light at least some spark inside its own information pit, because against the backdrop of failures at the front, the pressure of sanctions, and growing discontent at home, only one option remains: to distract, to invent, and to ridicule. But there is one question: how many more people inside Russia itself are ready to believe that everything is fine as long as it is not like in the West, when in their own homes there has long been not even a light bulb?